Alyssa. Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Bishop. I am a staff attorney at the Sexual Assault Legal Institute, or SALI, which is the legal arm of MCASA. I'm honored to be able to present to you all today. Today's topic we'll be covering is ethics, confidentiality, and advocate testimony. So we'll go ahead and just dive right in. Okay, so our objectives for today. By the end of today's presentation, you will be able to define what is confidential versus what is privileged information. You will be able to decide when to release client records. You'll know the difference between an expert witness and a fact witness. You should feel more comfortable testifying in court. And we hope that by the end of today's presentation, you will know how not to commit the unauthorized practice of law. So first, we're going to talk about confidentiality versus privilege. So they're similar, but there are some important distinctions. Confidentiality protects a survivor from disclosure of communication between professionals and a competent client or patient to any third party in any context. Privilege also protects the survivor from disclosure of communications between a professional and a client or patient to third parties in any context, but it also protects disclosure from being made in court or in depositions. So the main difference is that privilege protects a survivor from communication being disclosed in a court context. Privilege is a higher or a stronger protection than confidentiality. All privileged information is confidential. So that means all information that is privileged, you cannot share with a third party or in court, but not all confidential information is privileged. So there's some information that you can't disclose to a third party, but may be required to be disclosed in a court context if there's a subpoena requiring you to do so. So who is covered by confidentiality and privilege? You'll see that there is some overlap. Confidentiality covers medical providers, mental health providers, advocates, attorneys, and then some grant recipients. Privilege also covers mental health providers and attorneys, but it also has coverage for clergy, spouses, and privilege covers self-incrimination. So there's a clergy parishioner privilege that prevents clergy from testifying about information that one of their parishioners may have shared with them. There's a spousal privilege that prohibits spouses from testifying against each other in court. And there's also the privilege of to be saved from self-incrimination. So you aren't required to testify against yourself in court. So where did this protection come from? Again, you'll see that there is some overlap, but there are some differences. Confidentiality often comes from professional rules of ethics, professional licensing rules and regulations. Oftentimes, organizations have internal policies related to confidentiality. Also, a lot of grants that many of us, I believe, are covered by, such as VAWA and VOCA, have specific regulations and reporting or confidentiality requirements. And then finally, confidentiality may come from state or federal law. Privilege comes from the law. So privilege can be found in statutes, state law, as well as federal law. So I want to talk a little bit more about the Violence Against Women Act, because I know a lot of us work under VAWA. So this is directly from the statute. It has its own confidentiality protections, and the language of the statute reads, in order to ensure the safety of an adult, youth, and child victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and their families, Grantees and subgrantees under this subchapter shall protect the confidentiality and privacy of persons receiving services. So that's the language of the statute that serves as a confidentiality protection for recipients of VAWA. There are no exceptions for this for grant reporting. So I want to remind everyone to take care when you're using examples in your grant reports to make sure that you are adhering to the confidentiality provisions. There are also no exceptions for collaboration. So when collaborating with other organizations, you also want to be careful that you are not violating the confidentiality provisions of VAWA. There's also no internal data sharing under the provision, and you may not require sharing as a condition for providing services. So when you're intaking a client, when you're speaking to a client at the beginning of your relationship, you cannot require a client to waive this confidentiality as a condition of providing them services. One important distinction is that in certain situations, a parent or guardian can provide for the release of information for an unemancipated minor, but it's very important to note that if the parent is the alleged abuser, this does not apply. So alleged abusers who are parents cannot provide the release of information to the organization. So another important distinction is that the VAWA provisions are not privilege. They are confidentiality provisions. So that means you're prohibited from sharing information with third parties, but the VAWA provisions do not protect against court orders and subpoenas. So you can be required to disclose information in court. If there is information that must be disclosed per a subpoena, VAWA does require, however, that the providers attempt to notify the client beforehand. Oh, sorry. One more thing that I want to note about this is that while VAWA is not a privilege requirement, depending on the services that you are providing or that a survivor is seeking, there may, however, be privilege invoked. For example, if you provide legal services and the client is communicating with an attorney at your organization, that would invoke the attorney-client privilege. So although VAWA does not provide privilege, there may be privilege under other situations or relationships you have with your client. But VAWA itself does not create the privilege. So a little bit more information about confidentiality versus privilege. In both scenarios, the privilege or the confidentiality belongs to the patient or client, not the advocate. That means that in general, it's only the patient or the client who can waive the confidentiality or privilege and can give consent for their information to be released. There are a few exceptions to that. One of the exceptions is in the case of mandatory reporting of child abuse or abuse of a vulnerable adult. I would recommend that everybody consult with your organization or an attorney to find out if you are a mandatory reporter underneath the law of your state that you're practicing in. Not all service providers are mandatory reporters. For example, me as an attorney, I am not a mandatory reporter, but many of you working in different vocations may be. Another exception for this general rule is that people under 18, their parents may be the ones who are able to waive confidentiality or privilege, especially in the case of minors who are not emancipated. And then there are other exceptions that vary based on profession. For example, in the mental health profession, if a patient is a threat to their self or others, There may be an exception for reporting that information, or in the medical profession, or there may be an exception for malpractice claims. So you always want to check with legal counsel to make sure that you are under the law and following that correctly. All right, another important thing to note about confidentiality and privilege waiver is that it's all or nothing. So you can't just waive confidentiality to release some information, but choose to keep confidential other information. So I'm going to give an example, and this is a trigger warning. It does mention physical and sexual abuse. But here's the example. It says, Maria wants the rape crisis advocate to give expert testimony that Maria's husband physically and sexually abused their 6-year-old daughter, but not that Maria waited a month to go to the police after she found out. So this would not be possible. If Maria chooses to waive confidentiality or privilege, the advocate would be open to testimony on all of that information, not just the information about the abuse perpetrated by her husband. So that is something that you want to talk to your client about before they decide to waive confidentiality or privilege, that they can't just pick and choose the good facts to waive confidentiality for. It's an all or nothing choice. So why do we have privilege and confidentiality? It's designed to help people seek out services. If people think that information that they share is discoverable, they are often less likely to seek services, which could cause them more harm because issues are not addressed. It also protects children to have that confidentiality in place. And also, it was a choice by the legislature in light of the constitutional right to confront witnesses. So defendants in trials have a constitutional right to confront witnesses and ask them questions throughout the trial. But the legislator created privilege because they believed that certain types of professions or relationships should be protected from this type of disclosure. For example, they don't want attorneys or clergy members to be drawn into court and forced to testify about their clients or parishioners. That brings me to Uber privilege. So there are certain records that are given an Uber or super privilege. These are specifically records of attorneys or clergy. They are very, very hard, if not impossible, to obtain because they are so protected. But other records that are privileged, like mental health or social worker records or medical records, may be easier to obtain, especially in criminal or custody cases, because they are more likely to be relevant to the case, and any damage that may be caused from breaking the privilege is seen as less important than the damage that might be caused if an attorney or a clergy was forced to testify. So why and when should an advocate release confidential client records? You need a written release from the survivor, from your client. We recommend that when you do get this written release, you should use a HIPAA compliant model release. Most of your organizations should have one of these that they use as a template. So you want to make sure that you have a written request or a written release, I'm sorry. You also want to make sure if there's an attorney requesting information, for example, to use in a peace order or a family law case, this also includes a written release from the survivor. If there's a request from a state's attorney or a subpoena, you want to make sure that it comes with a written release. You may also be asked to release confidential records from a subpoena from the perpetrator's attorney, so from the defense counsel. And then there also may be a court order that would cause you to release records that are confidential. So when you're responding to a release for records, this is kind of the steps that we recommend you take to make sure that you're practicing in a survivor and trauma-informed manner. You want to first have a conversation with your client and see what they want. Do they want to keep the information confidential? Do they want to stop it from being disclosed? Or are they okay with it being shared? You also want to make sure that you have informed consent. So that looks like going over the pros and the cons and explaining what the results of releasing the records could be. You also obviously want to make sure that the release, if given, is voluntary. And like I said before, you want to make sure it's a written release that's made voluntarily and not made because the client believes that they have to sign this release in order to receive services. You want to make sure that they understand what they're doing when they sign it. And then I've said it a bunch of times, but you want to make sure that that release is written. So you want to make sure that you're using, as I said, a HIPAA compliant model release, and there are some special requirements depending on the type of records being released. For example, here's a list of specific types of record that require a specific release. So you want to look to state or federal law to see what the release requires for these types of records. So for drug treatment records or records about somebody's HIV or AIDS status, this requires a very specific release. And another unique situation is other providers' records. So for example, you may be requesting records from one provider, but within their records, they have information from another third-party provider. So it's kind of two levels of confidentiality that you'll need to address separately and make sure that you have releases for both levels of those records. Also, in your releases, you want to make sure that they're reasonably time limited. You don't want them to extend forever. So for example, we recommend a 1-year time limit that the release extends for until it expires. We always recommend not accepting releases from other agencies, but rather drafting your own release so that you know exactly what it says and exactly what it provides. And as I mentioned before, a conversation with your client is very important. So we would recommend requiring a conversation with your client before releasing any records, just to ensure that the release is voluntary and that there has been informed consent. So here are some of as I mentioned earlier, you want to go over the pros and cons with your client before releasing records. And here are some of those pros and cons. On the pro side, advocates' records may be very important evidence used to support the survivors or the state's case against a perpetrator. Also, a survivor's refusal to waive confidentiality may lead the court to infer that records would be damaging to a survivor or a state's case. So they could assume that because you're not willing to release records, there's something bad in them. So that would be a reason that you may want to release the records. A con to releasing records is that obviously there's a loss of privacy for the survivor. And as I talked about earlier, it's a total waiver. So survivors cannot pick and choose what parts of the records to release. If you release the record, everything in the record is then open for view and to be looked over and potentially used in the trial. So what do you do if you receive a subpoena? And I'm going to stress this, always want to recommend notifying your supervisor, your executive director, or your legal counsel immediately. So like as soon as you receive it, let them know. It's very urgent because there are certain things that can be done if you receive a subpoena to potentially fight against the subpoena. So with that, when you receive a subpoena, you do not want to turn over the records, even if the person with the subpoena tells you to. You don't want to do it right away because there are legal ways to argue against a subpoena, which I'll talk about in a moment. You also want to find out what the survivor wants. So after you notify your legal counsel or supervisor, you want to have a conversation with your survivor and your client about what they want. Explain to them what the subpoena is, what it's requesting, and talk through the pros and the cons. So there are some special requirements for subpoenas. So in criminal cases, the defense counsel must notify the victim and the prosecutor of a subpoena for medical records. Under HIPAA and state law, there is required notice to a patient and a reasonable time to file something called a motion to quash when healthcare records are involved. And financial records also require notice of a subpoena. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the motion to quash here. When you are responding to the subpoena, you need to get in contact with the lawyer. If you receive a subpoena, the lawyer will likely need a copy of the subpoena or the order, a copy of the records that the subpoena is seeking to be released. You'll want to give your service provider credentials, your supervisor's credentials, any grant supporting services, and then the date that the records or testimony is required to be released by. You want to give all this information to the lawyer because there's a chance that the lawyer can file something called a motion to quash, and there is a time limit to do so, which is why the urgency is so necessary. But a motion to quash is essentially a motion that requests that the court state that the information requested does not need to be disclosed and is protected. So a defense counsel may be requesting these records. If you file or the state's attorney files a motion to quash, that would be and the judge were to rule in favor of your motion, the judge would be saying that no, these records should not be released. They are protected, they are privileged, and the defense does not get access to them. That's why it's so important to contact legal counsel and to not give any records away at first, because there's a chance you don't need to, and you don't want to accidentally give information that is privileged. So that's why we always recommend speaking with legal counsel first. All right, moving on to the next section of our training today. We're going to talk a little bit about advocate testimony. So this is a screenshot from the movie My Cousin Vinny. It's a great film. We included this because it's a great example. This scene specifically is a great example of, I would say, expert testimony given in a trial, in a criminal trial. So what is advocate testimony? There's two types that I want to talk about. One is an expert witness testimony, and one is a fact witness testimony. So expert witnesses can help educate the judge or the jury about domestic violence and sexual violence, and generally can offer expert opinions about a specific case. They have some specific or special knowledge that the average person does not have, and they are specifically trained in the field and have thus expert opinions to offer. A fact witness can only testify from their personal knowledge. So information or facts that they've specifically and personally observed. This means that they can testify to personal knowledge of services provided to a specific survivor and how that survivor may have responded to the services. Advocates can often serve as both types of witness, as an expert or fact witness. So for expert testimony, unfortunately, in our legal field, a lot of judges and juries are still very uneducated about the complicated intricacies of trauma and the cycle of abuse. And so an advocate may provide really helpful information about the cycle of violence or delayed reporting or the effects of trauma on a survivor, and can help educate the judge or the jury about what this means and what it might look like. For a fact testimony, the advocate might be able to provide observations about the specific client or observations about the opposing party or observations about interactions between a parent and a child. So when you think about testifying, you also want to think about your records. So you always want to keep your records in the way that you maintain them with an eye towards future subpoenas. So you want to keep them and notate them in a way that gives context for potential bad facts, because it's better to have it all written out in the record than to have to explain it later on the witness stand. So I'm going to give another example. This is another trigger warning. It references sexual assault. So for example, if you're writing a report about your client, instead of writing client appears to be an alcoholic, you might want to consider writing something like, as is typical for many sexual assault survivors, the client self-medicates with alcohol. So instead of just stating the observation, you're giving a lot more context for the situation and for the observation. That would be very helpful for a judge or a jury to hear and see. And it might also prevent you from being necessary to testify if your records explain it already. So why might you want to testify as an advocate? Some of the pros versus the cons again. On the pro side, we have an advocate as a fact witness can help to corroborate a survivor's version of events. So you might have really helpful information to corroborate a survivor's story. An advocate as an expert might be able to explain the survivor's behavior, minimize victim blaming by a judge or jury, and again, explain some difficult concepts or theories that the judge or the jury might not previously understand. Some cons, obviously, it is a loss of privacy for a survivor, which we talked about earlier, and you will want to address with your client before agreeing to testify. You also are subject to cross-examination by the perpetrator's attorneys. So that means that they will be asking you questions and you'll have to answer them. There's also a lot of limitations, especially for fact witnesses, based on the rules of evidence. So there's something called hearsay. So you can't testify to, generally, there are some exceptions, but generally you cannot testify to what somebody else tells you or something, or what you hear. You can only testify to what you observe personally. So there are some limitations in your type of testimony because of that. We want to give some advice on what to do when you are preparing to testify. You want to review your records, but only if you're advised to by counsel. You want to provide your resume or your CV if testifying as an expert. We recommend not using your home address. You want to use your office or organization address on your resume or CV. You also want to make sure that your resume or CV is up to date and includes all your relevant experience, training, professional licensure. If appropriate, you also want to talk to the attorney calling you as a witness about what he or she plans to ask you, or your attorney may prepare you to testify as well. So I want to give some tips for testifying. First off, you want to stay calm. It can be very stressful. It is a very unique experience of public speaking. It can feel very adversarial. So you want to make sure that you stay calm, practice some deep breathing before you get started. You want to make sure you answer only the question asked. So the way that testimony works is it's question and answer. So the attorney will be asking you a specific question, and you want to pay attention that you're only answering that question and not giving more information than is necessary. I always recommend, taking a second to actually think about what was asked of you before answering. We also recommend not guessing. It's always okay to say, I don't know, or I do not recall at this time. That is actually way better to do than guessing and giving an answer that later turns out to be incorrect. It would look really bad and potentially be very damaging to your credibility and testimony if you give an answer that is later proven to be false. It's much better to just say, I don't know. You don't want to play lawyer, so you don't want to, make arguments or objections. You just want to ask the questions answer the questions that you're asked. And then finally, you want to talk directly to the judge, or if there's a jury, talk to the jury. So the lawyer will be talking to you and asking you the questions, but you want to make sure that your turn to face the jury or the judge. You're not telling the story to the lawyer. The lawyer's there to act as a tool to move the narrative along, but you're actually giving the information to the jury. So you want to make eye contact and look at the jury or the judge. Some more tips. You want to stop talking if you hear objections. So there are cases where you'll be giving your testimony and the opposing party or the opposing party's attorney will scream objection. That means stop talking. Because then the judge is going to turn it over to the lawyers to make some legal arguments about whether or not that information should be given and allowed into the testimony. So if somebody objects to your testimony and the judge, after hearing the arguments from the attorneys, says sustained, that means there's something about the rules that says that specific testimony is not allowed in. So that means you can't answer it. Oftentimes the attorney will skip to the next question. So just be prepared that you might have to skip what you were saying and move on to something else. Overruled means that you can. There's some rule of evidence that says that that testimony is allowed. So in that case, the attorney might repeat the question and you can start from the beginning and give your answer again in totality. If you're not sure what to do, you can always ask the judge, am I allowed to answer? May I answer? And the judge will let you know. Also, if you're confused about what the question is asking, especially if it's a question from the opposing party, it's totally fine to ask the attorney to repeat or clarify or say, I don't understand what you're asking me. Can you please rephrase it? That is completely fine. Just make sure that you're respectful while doing it and don't be argumentative while you're asking for clarification. So some more tips. Examination in the court or the deposition is not a conversation. It's question and answer. So you want to, again, be sure that you're answering the questions that you're asked and not just giving testimony outside of that. You want to be very careful to be accurate in what you're telling, especially when it comes to dates, important dates and timeline. It's important to be accurate. You don't want to agree with something just to be polite, especially on a cross-examination. Opposing party is not on your side. They are trying to trick you. They're trying to trip you up. They're trying to discount your credibility. So you don't ever want to say yes just because you feel like you need to be polite. You want to make sure that you're answering the question correctly and accurately. Something to keep in mind when you are giving testimony is that releasing records or testifying in one case may affect victims or survivors in future cases. So I'm going to give an example. Again, there's a trigger warning because it mentions sexual assault. In a county with only one judge, a rape crisis center advocate agrees to testify as a fact witness about Valerie's sexual assault and as an expert witness about delayed reporting. So in this situation, what will the judge expect the next time she hears a sexual violence case? In the judge's mind, they'll still have the information that you testify to about delayed reporting, about this specific sexual assault, and that will be useful in future cases and may mean that you don't have to testify in every case because you're educating the judge on these topics, which may be useful in the future. All right, so now we're going to transition to a conversation about ethics or the unauthorized practice of law. So what can you do as an advocate? Non-attorney advocates can provide victims with basic information about the existence of legal rights and remedies. They can provide victims with basic information about the manner in which judicial proceedings are conducted. They can assist a victim to prepare a legal pleading, legal documents on her own behalf by defining unfamiliar terms on a form, explaining where on a form the victim is to provide certain information, and if necessary, transcribing or otherwise recording the victim's own words verbatim. And an advocate can also sit with the victim at trial table if permitted by the court. An advocate cannot provide advice relating to a victim's rights or remedies, including suggesting the pursuit of a particular remedy. Advocates cannot provide information about the legal aspects of judicial proceedings. For example, how to present a case, how to call witnesses, how to introduce evidence. An advocate can't use their own language in preparing or filling out a form, pleadings, or other legal documents. And the advocate cannot engage in advocacy before any governmental representative on behalf of an individual victim. All right, so that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or I can put my email in the chat as well. Feel free to reach out to me directly. And then we've included MCASA's line and the Sexual Assault Legal Institute's main phone line. If you have a client who needs legal representation related to a sexual assault, we can potentially provide that. So feel free to reach out. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to our next presenter.
All right, just a second, everyone, while we get the next presenter set up. There we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Says I am not allowed to share my screen at this time.
Try again. I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay. Can we see my slide?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay. So good morning. My name is Juan Luis. Young. I am senior legal advocate for Sally. Sally's our Sexual Assault Legal Institute. I think you heard about Sally from Natalie before me. We're the legal arm or the law office that is part of the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and we provide legal services directly to survivors of sexual assault. And we have our team of lawyers, and then there's me and our other legal advocates. We assist survivors throughout the case. We're the first point of contact with our agency, and we help with intakes for new clients and whatever else the office needs to keep running our services. So I also do a lot of translation and interpretation for our Spanish speaking clients. We're basically part victim advocate and part paralegal. So today I'm going to be talking about safety planning, risk assessment, cyber stalking a little bit. It's definitely related to our day-to-day working with survivors. So safety planning is something we do with every new case that we get as part of our intake process. The safety of our clients is very important to us, and we of course need them to be as safe as they can be before we're able to provide any kind of service. So safety first. So what even is safety planning? I have this definition here from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Safety plan is a survivor's individualized plan developed in partnership with an advocate, focusing on strategies for staying safe. Typically, it's used with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. And in creating a safety plan, an advocate will discuss the unique needs and the circumstances of individual victims. Just so you'll know, also, safety plan can also mean slightly different things for different professions. I know they also have a safety plans in the mental health field for people who may be at risk of self-harm and suicidal ideation. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about survivors of sexual assault trying to manage risks from external threats to their safety. So if someone is trying to do harm to them. And also a lot of this will apply in cases of domestic violence as well. So in this sense, safety planning in this sense is something we do with clients regularly as part of our intakes. Typically at the end of our intake, but that can change if needed. We want to make sure that our clients are as safe as possible. If our client's not safe, they may not be able to contact us. So we can't offer any kind of relief. Now, objectives for safety planning. What is our objective? Why do we do it? What are we doing? Basically, our goal is to reduce the risk of further harm. Obviously, we're limited in what we can do over the phone as someone's legal advocate. I can't physically walk through their home and check their windows and their doors and their locks. We just do the best that we can from our position, from our desk over the phone to try to give them some ideas about how to stay safe. We can try to get people to take inventory of their situation and think about the risks and resources that they have available. Unfortunately, safety planning is not a guarantee of safety, but the idea is to improve the situation as best as we can. So we're going to do some of these things during the safety planning conversation. Um, Identify individual risk factors. So our advocates will have a conversation with the survivor to try to identify what these risk factors will be for their circumstance. So this can mean looking at their immediate surroundings, their physical setting, and it can be looking at their relationship with the perpetrator. So I guess the social surroundings or the social setting. And we'll talk about this a bit more later, but it can also mean, in terms of social circumstances, it can also mean talking about their nationality, thinking about their citizenship status, their economic, or their financial situation. Any number of things can play into and that can interact with their risk factors. We also want to increase protective factors. So that would be thinking about a survivor's support networks and their physical environment. Do they have ways of getting to safety, physically, of getting somewhere? Do they know their escape routes? Um, do they have access to transportation? Do they have friends and family that can help? Or other people and human resources that could assist. Reduce stress. So another objective that we have is to reduce their stress during a crisis. Stress can totally wreck your health, and it can really impact someone's ability to think and to function. So if they get to work on and they get to have a sense of what are their options and their resources, that can definitely be a helpful thing if and when something does happen. So we can encourage people to think through different scenarios and have some sense of what they might do in different situations, which hopefully can reduce some of the uncertainty and the anxiety and stress. And we seek to empower survivors. We want survivors to feel that they're in control of their safety as much as possible after this violation. We want them to reclaim that sense of power and agency over their situation. Nobody wants to feel like a victim, and the hope is that we can, by talking about what is in our power to do, put into action, that can be empowering. So how do we do this? What do we do in safety planning? In our experience, it's most effective to treat it as a collaboration with the survivor. We can come to the conversation with, armed with all this knowledge and experience and our empathy and our creativity, but we also have to be flexible and know that each time we're going to have a different conversation with a different person who's going through a new situation, a new and unique situation. So every safety plan conversation is going to be tailored to the individual survivor and to their needs and their circumstances. Depending on what these needs and circumstances are, the safety planning conversation can be very short, can be just talking about checking their social media privacy settings, or it can be a long discussion of specific plans and logistics, or it can be, anywhere in between. So typically I will start it as a conversation. I'll ask the person if they have any concerns about their safety to begin with. I'm not gonna, push it on them, but then from there, depending on their answer, the conversation can go wherever they want it to go. Sometimes I'll bring up a specific concern that I may have based on something they said during our prior conversation during our intake interview. We can make sure to circle back to that issue during safety planning, to see that they have that our survivor has the resources to handle that particular issue. or at least so that they can have the opportunity to talk about it with someone to, figure out their options or think through them out loud at least. Um, Now, I always try to keep in mind that the client, the survivor, they're the expert when it comes to their life and to their needs. I'm not here to tell them what to do. I can try to provide them my perspective. I ask some questions to encourage them to think about different problems and different options. Um, Hopefully that'll be helpful to the survivor. But I always try to keep in mind that I can't be the expert on how to plan for every aspect, all the circumstances of someone else's life. Um, Especially in the case where the abuser is someone close to them, they're going to know more about that dynamic with that person and that relationship. They're going to know more about that than I can learn in the time I've spent talking to this survivor. So they're going to know about the abuser's character, um, their idiosyncrasies, and how they might react to different things. Um, so to sum up, the survivor is the boss when I'm talking safety planning with them. I'm just consulting from the outside, trying to ask some questions to get them to consider things, and I can make some suggestions in response to. They will respond, and I can make some suggestions in response to that. Now, um, what do we have? Um, Generally, there's a number of different settings where people may suffer a sexual assault, and so many different settings that the survivor may need to navigate in terms of their safety um, after an assault. I'm going to introduce some examples on the slide of typical types of settings and typical types of cases that we may come across. But like I've been saying plenty, safety planning is not a one size fits all, and it has to take into account the specific circumstances of the survivor. So with each of these settings, they will bring different constraints and different challenges, uh, as well as different resources and different opportunities. So here's some examples in no particular order of things one can encounter. First, I have this picture of what looks like a university campus representing the school environment. On a college campus, the perpetrator can be a classmate or someone in the victim's friend groups. Um, they might be a friend of a friend or someone that lives down the hall in the same building. Um, in that type of setting, with that type of social network, that can have its own challenges. It will, of course, being a victim in school on a college campus will affect someone's access to their education. Um, and but also in that type of environment, there's the unique resources that you might not have somewhere else. Like there could be access to um, teachers, counselors, resource offices, uh, depending on the social environment, maybe sympathetic classmates or friends. No, uh, depending on the case and the specific conversation that one is having with the survivor, we can talk about using some of these resources on the campus to meet their safety goals. Um, Another common scenario can be the workplace. And as you see in this picture, there's many different types of workplaces. So they will each have different things to consider. Now, it's very unfortunate. I've worked with so many people that have been sexually harassed at work or sexually assaulted at work. And it's very, especially I find it Very unfortunate how much that happens to undocumented workers. People take advantage of their condition. So a lot of the times it'll be at the abuser, the perpetrator will be a boss or a supervisor. Um, there's a lot of variation between from one workplace to another, depending on the size of the company and what type of work that they do. But the different resources that may be available in that setting can include their coworkers or a trusted supervisor or a human resources department, if that's available. That'll depend on the size of the company and what type of work it is. Um, then we also have the home setting. Unfortunately, some people are not safe in their home. A lot of the time, the abuser can be a spouse or a partner in the same household. And in that situation, we have to think about their immediate physical safety. Uh, Depending on the abuser's personality or their character, if the victim is worried about retaliation from them, then we also have to think about how the victim can protect themselves without raising any suspicions. They have to try to be discreet if they're going to reach out for help or if they're going to consider reporting their abuser. So other resources to consider in that type of setting can include other members of the household or the family, uh, housemates if that's the type of house, um, a neighbor that the survivor trusts, or friends. In the case of threats or um, actual physical violence, sometimes law enforcement may be the only effective option. So we do want to encourage the survivor to think about having their phone charged at all times if possible, and maybe have emergency 911 or emergency services on speed dial. And lastly, question mark, meaning anywhere else, everywhere else. There's all kinds of situations where people can be harassed or physically abused. Um, there's definitely some common types of cases that we see, but every time, like I've been saying a lot, every safety plan and every um, conversation that we have with the survivor is always going to be different from, any other case, depending on the specifics of the situation. Um, Now, I see a question in the chat about what recommendations we would make if the client is unwilling to leave the home. Um, the first thing that comes to mind for me there is usually if they've reached out to us, they have filed for some kind of legal relief, so a protective or peace order, or they're about to, so they're about to have a conversation with one of our attorneys. To do that, we will try to have the abuser removed from the household. If that's not possible, there may be, uh, I've heard of people encouraging a survivor to squirrel away whatever money they have so that they can have a bit of a war chest for when that's not the right word, but some kind of savings for the um, any event that might happen. Um, and it will really depend on the specifics of what the dynamic is with the abuser there. I have to say it's I can't say I have a lot of experience with somebody who wants to stay in the same household while the abuser is also staying there. When people reach out to us, they're usually also in the process of um, the abuser being removed legally through a court order. So anyhow, when talking about safety planning in general, we want to keep in mind the context of where the abuse is coming from, who the abuser is, and in what setting. So situations can vary a lot. It can be an intimate partner. It can be in a dating context. It can be child sexual abuse by a family member or child sexual abuse by a teacher. It can be a stranger, uh, which can it can have its own challenges. Sometimes it's a known stranger, even like someone that the survivor recognizes, that they will see this person at the bus stop or at the lecture hall or around the neighborhood at the corner store. Um, in that case, we definitely want the survivor to think about how to be safe in that space, in that place. So in and around that bus stop, with that lecture hall or wherever it may be, where they come into contact with this person. Um, in any case, you have to troubleshoot different issues, um, and use your best judgment and understanding of the situation. In our particular process in our office at Sally, we get to talking about safety planning towards the end of our intake interview, after we spent some time, a good while, learning about um, the whole picture, getting a pretty good sense of what of the case. So we'll have as much information as we can by that point as we're going to have, to try to help the client troubleshoot the different possible issues. So at that point, we can, as much as possible, we can tailor the conversation around safety planning to their specific needs. Um, now, um, we're also going to want to consider that survivors may already have done some of this. They may be connected with different resources, like there may be counselors, there may be police officers or school officials or human resources at work. There may be other people involved, doctors, advocates, lawyers, etc. Or if they're not, we always make a referral to our local crisis center, and we may be able to encourage survivors to reach out to different types of services and make these connections if it's necessary and if it's appropriate. But maybe a survivor has already gone through some kind of a safety planning session or conversation with one of these professionals. Um, Usually, frankly, they've already thought about some or all of these things by themselves on their own. People are not um, unable to think about their safety. So will ask them about it, what they're thinking, what they've discussed with someone else if they have, and we can try to supplement what they've worked out. We can ask what steps they have taken to address their concern, and take it from there. Now, when thinking and talking about somebody else's safety, it's probably a good thing, sensitive thing to be aware of how they're different from yourself. We're not talking about advice to keep ourselves safe, and they have their own circumstances. So I'm going to get into the idea of intersectionality, or taking into account just how people of different backgrounds, people of different identities, uh, people of different social status, they may have different experiences and they may be treated differently in society. So intersectionality within safety planning. Depending on the area that you work in and the I guess the population that you serve, you may come into contact with survivors from different types of backgrounds in your day-to-day. A lot of times, survivors from different backgrounds may face really serious barriers to that help. Maybe if they're a member of a minority group or a lower status group. One example I see a lot and that I know well, so I'll talk more about that, but this applies to everything. But I know the case of our Hispanic clients um, fairly well. Most of them are going to be first generation undocumented immigrants. They're the first, they grew up somewhere else and they migrated here. And so they don't speak English very well, or they don't speak English at all. So in that situation, somebody who is the victim of a crime, they're in a foreign country, the police don't speak their language, and the courts don't speak their language. It's going to be really, really hard for them to ask for help, to even say help, um, um, and to receive help if they don't understand what's being said to them. And now, if you add to that the fact that as first generation immigrants, more likely than not, they're going to be living in a um, small community where everybody knows each other, a small neighborhood. And that can make it even harder to speak out for fear, for shame that everybody will know what happened, especially if the abuser is also a member of the same community, which is often the case. Plus, a lot of time you add the complications of the a lot of times they're going to be someone in the same household, not just in the same community. So a partner or a family member or a spouse. So lots of layers of different complications there. All of this, of course, is not only the case for Spanish-speaking immigrants, but it's going to apply in different different ways to small communities of all kinds. People from rural areas may also have small, tight-knit communities where everybody knows everybody else. They speak English fine, but they have other similar challenges. People from certain other communities of color or sexual minorities, they might feel unsafe around police officers. They might have some distrust towards law enforcement and the state. So that might make it harder for them to reach out for help, at least help in that particular way from contacting law enforcement. Some people may fear because of their appearance, their race, their sex, their sexual orientation, they might feel that they're less likely to be believed as victims, which again will deter someone from reaching out and seeking help. On the other hand, there's also economic status can also be a factor. For example, a survivor with no income or they will have a really hard time, really hard time leaving their abuser that they depend on financially for for everything, for their support, for their roof above over their head, for their meals. Someone who's struggling with poverty, they may not be able to just leave a job if they're being sexually harassed or abused by their um, boss at work. They can't afford to just not have an income. Um, they may not even be able to. They sometimes they can't even afford to pay their phone bill, so that they can't call someone to ask for help. So that's another layer, which of course is not mutually exclusive with race or sexual identity. You can have different combinations of these things. Everybody's unique. Now, of course, safety is more than only avoiding physical violence, but safety can be just harder to access for some people. So while maybe we all have access to the same resources in theory, it can be harder to actually do that for people with different circumstances. People who don't speak the same language, don't have access to the phone in the same way, or after maybe they're working two shifts and they're only able to do anything after our office is closed. Who knows? But all of these things compound. Now, intersectionality, it's also helpful to be, I think it's probably a good thing to also be aware of this. It's not just about the ways people are disadvantaged from their different identities. Sometimes we can experience privileges because of our relative situation in these things. I think it's important to also consider that flip side of the coin. So this is kind of obvious, but I've seen that survivors um, who speak English comfortably, they will be a lot more comfortable talking to police or to law enforcement, um, or they will be um, less uncomfortable trying to make a report or seeking help. Someone who has the economic stability and the security, they may be able to relocate to a different neighborhood. They may be able to move to a new city for their safety, to get away from whatever is happening. I see a question in the chat about interpreters. So a lot of our advocates speak Spanish, and we also have access to um, the language line service that allows for phone interpreters for almost any language, every major language, and a lot of less major languages. So yes, we can work with people uh, who don't speak English. Yes. Um, Now, as a personal example of I guess intersectionality, um, I can talk about my own experience. I speak Spanish. I'm also a first generation immigrant. Um, I didn't grow up here. I came here. Well, I came here in high school. Um, I know that around here in the United States, when people see me, they don't think that is a white American person. They see me as someone who's uh, probably foreign. Um, but on the other hand, I grew up with in a middle class family. Uh, I had access to nice education. I was able to go to college in the United States, and I speak English in a well, like someone who had this access to education. Um, so I've had um, I can I can experience both privileges and disadvantages. I have the ability, I have the great privilege that I can afford to go visit my family in Peru. I can fly and I can, but on the other hand, when I travel, I will. This is a little bit speculative on my part, but I get randomly selected a lot more often than most people to have my stuff searched, which is it's a tiny little problem. It's not like I don't have access to my human rights, but it's an example of, and I'm sure we can all think of different examples of how um, our positions in these different aspects of how we're perceived socially, they can affect our personal experience um, in accessing different things. Um, Now, the last thing I want to say about intersectionality is you can't possibly know everything about every type of person. You can't, um, you don't have to. You don't have to know everything about every type of background. The important thing is to approach the conversation with humility and an open mind. I try to be aware of my own privileges, try to be mindful of where I'm coming from, try to not assume things about individuals and be ready to listen to their their knowledge about their situation and their experience, and then I be ready to adapt to that. So I've had to work with for example, an Indian woman from particular culture who lives in a small community here in the United States. I can't imagine what it's like as someone for someone like that to um, who has extreme anxiety about being disowned by everybody in her life if she were to leave her abusive husband. Not something I grew up with, but I can listen to her situation. I can ask some questions to try to get her to think about what are the options in that situation and try to offer resources that I know that she might have access to try to help her navigate the situation however she's comfortable doing, and that's as best as I can offer. That's my spiel on intersectionality. Um, Now, risk assessment. What is risk assessment? It's analyzing somebody's situation to try to identify potential hazards and try to think ahead about what could happen if this hazard, this risk were to materialize. Um, so I have some examples of questions in this slide of things that can be helpful to discuss with the client to explore their risks and to brainstorm about these possible scenarios. So, for example, one of the first things we do when somebody reaches out to our office, we will ask about, is it safe to contact you? Is in the future after this call, after we hang up from this call, is it safe for you to receive a phone call from us with this number? That's one of the first things. So this lets have a baseline sense of the safety situation. If the answer to that question is qualified, maybe they want us to not leave a message or only call between this an hour and this hour, whatever it may be. That gives us a sense of the threat level that they feel. Yeah. Sometimes we also offer, because of our organization's name is Sexual Assault Legal Institute, our initials SALI, we go by Sally. So a lot of times with a lot of our advocates, this doesn't work very well with me and my male voice, but we'll say a lot of times people want us to not say we're calling from the Sexual Assault Legal Institute. So we can call them on the phone and say, hi, this is Sally. Or we can leave a voice message and say, hi, I'm calling from Sally. So that's one way that we deal with that. And it sounds like someone's girlfriend is calling to chat about something, or something less threatening than the legal institute. Anyhow, other things that we check actually: is it safe to contact via mail? Is it safe for you to receive letters or documents related to this case at your home address? Or is there a risk that someone else is going to see that, open your mail, and then that the survivor will be at risk or exposed to some kind of retaliation? And then these other questions, they give us more things to explore the safety situation for any given survivor. So, for example, the next three questions. Have you seen or had any contact with the perpetrator? Where might you come into contact with them, or in what ways? Have they contacted your friends or family? This gives us a sense of actual contact with the perpetrator or potential contact with the perpetrator. So to help think about that risk. We can also get a sense of what the survivor's lifestyle or their life routine is like. And so based on that, there may be other risks that we can think about or try to mitigate. based on that. So does the perpetrator know where you live? Do they know where you work, where you go to school? Do you go to the gym? Um, whatever that routine is like, um, where you go to the bank, where you buy groceries. People mostly do their banking on their smartphone nowadays, but if they have to go somewhere routinely, that is um, part of that routine commute or travel pattern that somebody might want to think about if they're thinking about their physical safety in different spaces. Um, and for each type of different risk, we can then ask more questions and try to come up with help the survivor come up with different strategies that they might do for each of these concerns, if they have these concerns. Um, and then there's the other couple questions on the slide. Has the perpetrator stalked you, your friends, your family? Are there times of day or places where you feel less safe? Of course, more specifically talking about the act of stalking per se, that's gonna I guess more directly target that risk. And we want to know so we can help them think about, if this is happening, what might your options be. Um, so let's see. Back to safety planning. When we have this conversation with survivors, we have we base our conversation off of or not, I wouldn't say base it off of, but we have a list of tips and trips and things that we might refer to. And I want to review some tips for this specific scenario of for example, if you're at home, uh, things to stay away from. If and this is especially applicable if the abuser lives in the same home or in the same household. It could also be somebody that is close by or knows where the survivor lives. But if you're at home and you're being attacked, um, stay away from kitchen, stay away from places with weapons. That's um, what I was told when I first started training for this position, is that kitchen can be a place that you think to go because there might be a knife there to use for self-defense, and that is maybe not recommended because the abuser could also have access to a knife just as well, or some other tool that they can use to do harm. Stay away from small spaces where a perpetrator could trap you. Um, Bathrooms, closets. Um, go to a room with a door or a window to escape, a room with a phone and a locking door to allow you to call for help. So a lot of times, admittedly, I'll say, for a lot of people, these will seem like obvious things, but maybe somebody hasn't thought about it, and it can be helpful to get them thinking. At the very least, it's may not apply directly, but it'll get them thinking about their physical surroundings. And so it'll get them thinking about what would their options be in their physical space. I don't know their home, but it will get them looking around and um, thinking about where would they go, where they could go if something happened. So sometimes an a an attempt at a assault or an attack in the home, um, if somebody runs to a bathroom or a closet, and they can end up locked in there, and they're safe for the time being, but they may be safely trapped in a place that they can't get out of. There's only one way in and out of that closet or that bathroom. So that's why we try to um, the point is not so much this is where you should go. It's more to think about, to take inventory mentally of what are the options in the home. What are the rooms that have um, access to a emergency I don't know, a fire exit or whatever it may be, depending on a house and apartment. It'll always be different every time. Yeah, and I have call 911. This is, of course, if someone is able to, if um, there is a danger or a risk at home of a physical harm, we encourage people to try to have their phone charged if they have access to a phone. Um, if they need to escape from something, to go in the direction of the phone, or a room where they have access to one, so that they can, in the case of emergency, call law enforcement. If they do, try to get the name of the person that they talk to and their ID number. Now, other things to consider when it comes to being safe at home. Become familiar with the local, your options, your safe places. That can include a neighbor, a trusted neighbor, or a friend nearby, family member that lives in the area. It can mean your local church. It can mean the police station. Maybe somebody knows where their local shelter is, their domestic violence shelter. Um, it's probably a good idea to memorize the routes to some kind of safe place nearby. Usually people will know already what that is. Um, Now, changing locks, checking the locks on all the windows, changing security codes. If a perpetrator has been removed from a shared residence, that's a good time to change locks to make sure that they can get back in. Um, which is often the case in our work, at least we're in the midst of peace and protective orders, legal proceedings to remove somebody from a home. Um, Confirm if you have sufficient and functional outdoor lighting. This can help people feel safer. And of course, it depends on the type of housing that they live in. Um, but I mean, apartment versus single family home versus a condo or whatever it may be. But having outdoor lights can be a deterrent. Motion activated lights, they can let you know if something's happening outside, and they can maybe make an aggressor think twice before doing something, make them think that, oh, somebody can see me approaching. Um, uh, make an escape plan. This is related to my first point here, but um, the idea is to encourage the survivor to think about where they would go if they needed to escape, and come up with a plan for that, based on their local safe places or what they have access to. If you have children, if they have children, make sure that they know the children, depending on their age, but that they know what the plan is, or that they know who they can call and where they can go. Um, Maybe do some practice runs, go on a walk with the kids, or something. Uh, Prepare an escape bag. I've also heard it called the go bag. Bag that's ready to go, to grab and go. So if somebody's thinking about leaving an abuser, or they're worried about, they're anticipating a potential attack, um, they might consider packing a bag with important things that they might need if they had to leave their home quickly. Um, and then we can think about what would you need to have in that bag. That can be clothes for a few days. It can be any important documents. Um, so think IDs, medical insurance cards, any medical documents or prescriptions, passports, maybe bank or financial accounts information, prescription medications. Um, yeah, that kind of thing in a bag, and the bag can go somewhere safe in the house where they can just grab it on their way out, or even the bag can go somewhere outside of the home, um, with the at the neighbor's house, or a relative or somebody that lives close by that they can, where they can keep that safely away from the abuser. Um, Ask trusted neighbors to call the police if they see the perpetrator at the house or around in the neighborhood. Um, this may be more depending on the situation. There may even be uh, that may be some kind of a crime if there's already a protective order in place. Regardless if there's um, if they see an abuser, they could call law enforcement just to try to, keep the peace. Um, Obviously, it helps if the neighbors, if you have a good trusting relationship with the neighbors. They might have an incentive to also keep a peaceful neighborhood. So uh, they might want to help with that. Um, Now, in addition to the things on this slide, I I read in the I read my a coworker's notes who used to deliver this presentation that survivor can maybe try to prepare an excuse ahead of time to so think about what can I tell my abuser, um, as an excuse for leaving the house for a little bit. Um, I can try to come up with different possible reasons why they would have to leave the house, at, depending on the time of the day or the different situations. And then when the day comes, they have a perfectly reasonable explanation why they have to go somewhere, um, and they can use that to get away safely. Um, Another thing I've read for safety in the home that, um, depending on the situation and the type of home again, but sometimes a survivor may choose to sleep in a more public area in the house. So instead of a bedroom, a bed in a bedroom, somewhere private where no one can see or hear, uh, they might sleep in a living room in a couch, um, where there are more potential witnesses to any abuse, which would deter a abuser. People can also hang bells outside their door to, um, alert anyone if anything were to happen. Anyone within earshot would hear any attempt at opening that door. Um, and in the worst case scenario, I've talked to people who successfully did this. Um, Barricade someone could barricade themselves inside of a room, literally putting furniture, up against the wall, up against the door handle, um, while they're calling for help on their phone. It it has happened. I wouldn't, of course, it's in case of emergency, um, type of thing, but it can be done. Now, outside of the home, um, similar, we have on our list some different types of considerations, just things to think about, things to ask to get someone to think about their situation. Change regular travel habits. This will make somebody harder to, um, track, to follow around. It'll make it harder for a perpetrator to anticipate their moves and to be able to run into them, on any given day and disrupt their day. Um, Travel with others whenever possible. This is one of the first things that people do instinctively without, talking to us. Um, I usually find that if they're not doing it, it's because if they're not doing some kind of a buddy system, it's usually because they don't have access to someone, or they don't want to inconvenience someone to go places with them and do things with them. Um, but it's very helpful, and it really helps people feel safe when that's possible. Um, Alternate where they do their banking, their grocery shopping, or other routine activities. We've touched on that. Um, but changing things up can make it harder to predict, where somebody's going to be. Cancel any shared accounts, bank accounts, credit card accounts. Anytime the survivor uses that credit card or that account that they both share, that they share with their abuser, they may be giving the abuser information about where they are, where they're shopping, what they're doing. So this one is a potential weak spot for people if they're trying to not disclose their location. In general, anything that can make survivors harder to trace, and it will make them feel safer. So any change in habits, switching up the regular routines and schedules, that can be effective. Now, safety in the workplace. In that case, some things we might suggest could be providing a picture of the perpetrator to security staff, and trusted colleagues. This will depend on the type of workplace that it is. It might not always make sense, but if the perpetrator is a coworker or somebody that the staff knows, that can be effective. Talk to a supervisor to discuss what they can do to make it more difficult to find a survivor. This one, there's a couple of ways that this can happen. Sometimes they can, what's listed on the slide, to remove somebody from a website. In other type of work, when there's not a website with someone's bio, maybe it means to physically move their work area to a different, more hidden away section at the back of the workspace, or setting the survivor to work in a team with a buddy that makes them feel safe. Just some ideas. Requesting that security walk you to your mode of transportation. Again, depending on the type of workplace, if they have security staff, if they have, or a buddy, if that's available. Save any voice messages that the perpetrator leaves at work. This can be useful for evidence, potentially even. Now, safety on campus. We have things to consider in that particular setting. Can be taking different routes again. Utilizing campus security, knowing on-campus and off-campus resources. This is the more or less the same theme we've discussed already, but knowing what is available depending on the specific context. This can be the campus health center, knowing where the campus police is, the sexual assault crisis center. Is there a psychological, like a counseling office or a service available? Do they have the phone number for campus safety, campus security? Have that saved. And if there's concerns about privacy, if someone is looking for help from campus services, they can also think about outside of the campus, off campus, what are the services available in the surrounding area. No, campus security, that can mean some campuses have like safe rides for people that are coming home at night after studying in a library. Schools may have different services to, I guess, promote the safety of their students. Request a schedule or a housing change. This can be done by talking to a dean or some other administrator. Having backup plans. Like, do they have their campus address memorized? Do they carry cash in case something happens to their phone or their card? Is there someone whose number they know from memory? in case their phone is not working or they lose it, to someone they can call from memory. They know their number. If they have a car, do they have a spare key somewhere? Um, and be mindful of victim blaming. This is more getting into psychological safety, but the social environment can also um, make a difference in how a survivor feels, and in the case of school situations, how they're able to access their education. Um, so partying and alcohol are a big part of the social culture in college campuses. Um, on the one hand, definitely a good thing to know your limits when it comes to drinking so that you can tell if something feels off, where you may have been drugged or something. Um, Unfortunately, we know it's not unheard of that somebody could put something in someone's drink and take advantage of them. Um, so that's something to consider. Um, not not drinking something that you don't know where it came from. But on the other hand, um, a victim, the survivors, their partying habits or their drug or alcohol use, and sometimes abusers can try to use that to smear their character or to make them seem like they're not worthy of sympathy. They're not they're not the perfect victim. Um, so um, people can try to be more selective and more discerning and try to curate healthier friend groups and peer groups that don't entertain these type of victim blaming attitudes to so that they're better able to function if something happens in terms of their emotional um, safety. Now, children. Some some of our safety planning tips will apply to people with children. In an ideal world, I wish we wouldn't have to do this, but we do have to try to get some kind of rules. So first thing is, as soon as a kid is old enough to memorize their home address and their phone number, they can learn how to call 911 to give and give their address and you know, give their address and their parents' phone number or some whatever information to the police. Um, Teach them who to call for help. Um, this will vary, but in addition to 911, it can be friends, family members, whoever is a safe person for them and for the parents and the family. Um, Make sure they know who to go to if they see the abuser at school. This is very helpful in cases where the abuser is in the household and there may be some kind of a custody dispute or court orders related to that based on a protective order. Um, Whatever the situation, um, make sure the kids know who to who to talk to at school, who is an adult that is safe to go to and that they can come to for help. Um, and make sure that the school knows not to give their name or phone number to anyone. Um, Again, similar thing, an abuser can try to pick up the kids from school when they're not supposed to or something like that. Um, Now, preparing for an emergency. Uh, some of this we've discussed, but get a cell phone, keep it charged if and on your person at all times if possible. Sometimes I have heard of some crisis centers may be able to assist people in getting a phone. If possible, keep it on their person and keep chargers everywhere. Keep a charger at work, in the car, in their purse, at home, in everywhere. Have emergency contacts saved, pre-programmed, speed dial, whatever it is. Um, Call for help in case of emergency. Um, Memorize emergency numbers and important numbers in case they lose their phone or they lose service or whatever it may be. And these numbers can be, people um, that you've identified are safe resources, a family member, or even a local crisis center, um, your Sally advocate, um, whoever, whoever is appropriate. Um, Sometimes a secret safe word or phrase can be used to let someone know that um, help is needed the in a crisis. Sometimes in a case where somebody needs to be really, really discreet, that can be the best option to try to be sneaky. Pass it off as pass it off as something else, something trivial, while asking for help. Um, Emotional safety. That's another key component that we discussed during safety planning. We try to get a sense of what is their social safety net and their support network. So important information to know here would be who knows about the assault, who can you reach out to, um, and having somebody um, having somebody can be very protective in many ways. So we will refer them to their local crisis center so that they have access to that. Um, we've talked about how having other people on your side can be very helpful. Someone to call in an emergency for emotional support um, can help manage the stress of the situation um, and provide a perspective for any safety planning or any situation that may be happening. Um, our local member centers, the crisis centers, will also have be able to help people through their counseling services. They can help address the neurobiological effects of trauma. So working on that is part of well, maintaining a body that works and that is able to keep somebody safe. Um, Now, I want to talk about cyber stalking a little bit. Um, let's see what it is. In Maryland, what is stalking? Stalking is a crime. It's defined as a persistent and malicious pattern of approaching someone um, or pursuing them in order to make the person feel afraid that they or someone else is going to suffer serious bodily injury, assault, rape, or sexual offense, false imprisonment or death, or the stalker intends to cause, knows, or could know that this conduct will cause serious emotional distress to another person. Um, and as you see from the numbers, 1 in 6 women are stalked at some point. A lot of people. It's very prevalent. And ah, cyber stalking. What about cyber stalking? Um, Unwanted advances or threatening behavior directed to someone using the internet or other forms of online communication. Um, how severe is it? How bad is it? 21% of women ages 18 to 29 report being sexually harassed online. 53% of women ages 18 to 29 say that someone has sent them explicit images without their consent. You probably didn't need me to tell you that, but it's very prevalent. Um, Stalking on social media, some of the ways that um, it can look, some of the actions the stalker might take. Uh, Following or sending friend requests to someone to track their statuses, keeping track of um, GPS check-ins or like location check-ins, sending harassing or threatening messages, making fake profiles to track someone, um, posting anonymous abuse, posting false information or defamatory information, um, posting nude images or other sexual content. Um, hmm. Now, I want to talk about some uh, risks and some ways to think about using these technologies safely. Um, First, does the perpetrator know someone's phone number or email? These are some of the questions that we'll consider. Um, does the perpetrator know any of their passwords? Uh, do they have any social media accounts? Uh, that's one possible way that they can be targeted for harassment through this to these accounts and these messaging services. Do they share any accounts with the perpetrator? That's one way that they can get information about what the survivor is doing and where they are. Are they friends with the perpetrator? And that can be on Facebook or connected in some other social media network. Still, the consideration there is that, again, that's one way they can get information from their friends' posting activity. Is anyone in their social network friends with the perpetrator? That is that can be a consideration depending on the type of network, the type of social circle, or the situation. Maybe the survivor has blocked their abuser on social media. That doesn't mean the abuser can't get access to what the survivor is posting or sharing through a mutual friend, through somebody who doesn't know what's happening, or even they know and they're complicit and sharing information with the abuser. So that may be something to think about. Usually people have, but if not, I'll make sure to consider the general social climate in that person's life. Has the perpetrator contacted them, or had someone else or their friends contact the survivor? Have they posted anything about the survivor online? What did they post? Is that still online? Just some of the questions we might ask to assess the risk. Have they reviewed their privacy settings since the assault? And can they adjust these settings to make their information more secure? I always make it a point with our clients, let's say under 30, our younger clients, to talk about Snapchat in particular. That's one that bothers me especially because it's very popular with younger people. And by default, it wants people to share their location with all of their friends at all times. So that's something that I make sure people think about at least. They can choose to leave it on, the location sharing on, but I want to make sure that they do that knowingly if there's any risk that can put them in danger of any retaliation or anything having to do with their abuser. Now, just some recommendations that we will have specifically for different types of social media platforms and services. Don't share information about your home, your work, your school. Same thing we've been discussing previously, but be careful about sharing this type of information online where somebody could somehow the abuser could have access to it. Don't accept requests to connect with someone you don't actually know. Block the perpetrator on all platforms. And related to what I was saying, block anyone who might sympathize with them and who they might be able to get information through, or information from. Consider removing their profile picture using a nondescript image, something that will keep them safe or make it less apparent who is behind that page, and reviewing privacy and security settings for every profile. Make sure they know how it looks to how their profile looks to anyone that might see it. This is a little bit extra, but can be important depending on the type of relationship and abuser. Sometimes people have to assume anything that they upload can be seen by anyone and can be accessed by anyone, because you never know who is going to grab a screenshot and share it with somebody. So in the extreme of being extra careful, we might suggest thinking about it that way. Now, some specific recommendations for specific platforms in Twitter, for now called X, but don't use third-party apps that might require access to your account. That's obviously create a strong password, but third-party apps can be one way to sneakily steal information about someone's account. Enable login verification to make sure someone's not using the account who shouldn't be. Watch out for shortened URLs. That can be one way to take you to some kind of a phishing website. Facebook. A lot of people are, there's a lot of fake accounts. So be mindful of Facebook use. I don't have a specific recommendation, but these are some things to keep in mind. There is a lot of harassment going on on Facebook. Snapchat and Instagram, delete identifying information from pictures. That can be like if somebody takes a selfie outside of their house, you might be able to tell their house number or their street sign in the background. So being mindful of things like that. Don't use your real information when you sign up, unless you really need to. I don't see why people would really need to. So that's something to consider. And block harassers. Now, technology harassment in the workplace, very common. 1/3 of women has been sexually harassed at work. 25% of those were harassed via text or email, and 70+% of them did not report the harassment. Safety and technology using the internet. Let's look at some tips we have for that. Change passwords periodically. Every service and every system will recommend that also. Using private browsing if sharing a device with an abuser so that they can see what you've been doing online. And different browsers will have different, they call it different things, but they'll have some kind of private browsing. Delete old accounts. No need to have any information, any private information floating around the internet. Setting boundaries with family and friends about tagging. This related to what I said about what you post having private information, what other people post can also give away things about who you're spending time with or where you're hanging out with your friends. Depending on the situation, the survivor may have to opt out of being tagged in things. They may have to opt out of posting for a group picture with people that will be uploaded somewhere. So that's something to think about and for them to judge based on their risk level. Yeah, and that's related to preserving safety and privacy with friends and family. Being very suspicious, very careful with suspicious emails, not following links in those, and keeping track of unwanted calls, texts, and messages, and voicemails from the perpetrator. Trends in spyware. I think I'm going to run out of time, unfortunately, but I just want to say spyware is accessible. We have seen it advertised to abusers so that they can try to get someone to download a string of malicious code into their device, and their device will start sharing information with an abuser. Here's some things that can be indications that your device may be infected. The battery's running out fast. Maybe there's weird messages, background noises. It starts and shuts down randomly. These can be clues that something is happening. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention, you can see the links on the slides, but there is the option to petition your health insurance provider to not send out explanations of benefits to the owner of the account. So if a survivor is getting their health insurance through a parent or a spouse or partner, they can request that those communications about their services that they're using that doesn't get sent to the principal person of the account if that's their abuser. And the links are here for that form to submit to the state in English and in Spanish. yeah, unfortunately, I'm running out of time, but that is, someone can fill that out, submit that, and the insurance company should be able to stop sending that um, to the abuser. So, in summary, consider the people that you're working with and their identities, prioritize their immediate physical safety, create plans, and use what supports they and resources they have available. Be mindful of the pitfalls of social media and the internet. Um, The client can take notes if it helps them remember plans and strategies. We can review the plan together if they take notes and come up with something. And we can also email them a list of emergency contacts and resources and tips and things to consider um, in the future when planning for their safety themselves afterwards. Um, that's all. My contact information is here. Um, feel free to reach out. Feel free to refer people to our office for legal services.